You know, that subtle, creeping sensation when you realize the world isn't as solid as you once thought. That moment when the foundation you've spent 20 years standing on suddenly feels like shifting sand. For me, that realization didn't arrive during a lecture at university or through some grand dramatic tragedy. It happened in the absolute silence of a late August afternoon, through the gravelly voice of a man I had spent my entire life ignoring. His name was Silas for 25 years. He had been the architect of our family sanctuary, the invisible hand that kept the wildness of the world at bay beyond our property lines. He was the man who pruned the roses before the sun was fully awake and who left long after the porch lights flickered on. To my parents, he was a line item in a budget, a reliable fixture as unchanging as the old stone wall at the edge of the woods. To me, for the longest time, he was simply the smell of cedar mulch and the rhythmic sound of shears against boxwood. But that summer, everything changed. The world didn't just shift. It shattered and reassembled itself into something unrecognizable. Silas wasn't just the gardener anymore. He became the mirror in which I finally saw myself. The words he whispered to me, sentences I never could have anticipated, cracked open a shell I didn't even know I was carrying. In that one instant, the rushing noise of my life fell away, leaving only a terrifying, beautiful clarity. Before I take you through the gates of that garden and into the heart of this story, I want to thank you for being here. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own home, or if you've ever found wisdom in the most unlikely of places, I hope you'll stay with me. Please take a moment to subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Are you in a busy city, or do you have a garden of your own? Knowing where these words land means everything to us. Now, let the world outside fade away and listen. The air that summer was heavy, a thick blanket of humidity that seemed to trap every sound and scent against the earth. I remember the perfume of freshly turned soil and the sharp green tang of mown clover, the kind of scents that stick to your skin and follow you into your dreams. It was the soundtrack of my childhood, the distant drone of a lawnmower, the scrape of a shovel, the steady hum of bees in the lavender. Silas was always there, a permanent resident of the periphery. If I closed my eyes, I could see the map of his life written in the tan lines on his neck and the deep creases around his eyes. He had a way of moving that was almost meditative. He didn't rush. He didn't fight the earth. He worked with a precision that suggested a deep, secret conversation between his hands and the roots. He was a quiet man, a man of few words and even fewer demands. But as I sat on the veranda that first week back from college, I realized I had never truly looked at him. I was 20, and I was vibrating with a restlessness I couldn't name. I had just finished a grueling year of study, chasing a degree my father wanted for me, and a future that felt like a well-tailored suit that was 3 sizes too small. I felt older, yes, but I also felt profoundly hollow. Being back in my childhood home felt like trying to fit back into an old pair of shoes. The shape was familiar, but the pinch was unbearable. I was a stranger in my own skin, wandering through rooms filled with my own history, feeling nothing but a desire to jump out of my windows. I felt stuck, not just in the house, but in the version of me that everyone expected. I was the successful daughter, the one with the bright future, the one who never caused trouble. But inside, I was a tangle of weeds, overgrown and suffocating. One afternoon, the sky was a bruised shade of violet, the kind of light that makes the greens of the trees look almost electric. I was sitting on the top step of the porch, a thick philosophy book open on my lap. I hadn't turned a page in an hour. I was staring at a patch of brown grass near the fountain, wondering if it was dying or just dormant. Silas was a few yards away, kneeling in the dirt. He was tending to the hydrangeas, his fingers gently clearing away the dead heads to make room for new growth. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that looked like weathered oak, corded with muscle and dusted with the earth he loved. He had a quiet power, a stillness that made the frantic energy in my own chest feel loud and intrusive. I watched him for a long time. I wondered what he thought about while he worked. Did he dream of other places? Did he regret the years he'd spent in this one garden? I realized then that I knew nothing about the man who had shaped my world. To my surprise, it was Silas who broke the silence. He didn't look up from the plant he was cradling, but his voice drifted toward me, low and resonant. "The soil is tired this year," he said. It wasn't an observation meant for anyone in particular, but I felt it pull at me, like a physical weight. "Tired?" I asked, setting the book aside. He finally looked up, squinting against the fading sun. His eyes were the color flint hard, but not cold. It's been asked to give too much without enough rest. Sometimes you can't just keep planting things and expecting them to bloom. You have to let the land just be for a while. I felt a sharp prickle behind my eyes. "I think I know how the soil feels," I murmured, the honesty of the statement catching me off guard. Silas set his shears down and stood up slowly, his joints giving a faint pop that spoke of decades of labor. He walked toward the porch, stopping. Just a few feet away, he didn't invade my space. He simply anchored himself in it. "You're back from the university," he noted. "The one with the big stone gates." "Yeah," I replied, weighting my chin on my knees. "First year down, only 3 more to go. It feels like a lifetime." He nodded, his gaze wandering over the expanse of the lawn. "Everything is changing out there, I imagine. New people, new ideas. It can make a person feel like they're being pulled apart. It makes me feel like I'm losing the part of me that actually knows what it wants," I confessed. I didn't know why I was telling him this. My mother would have told me to be poised. My father would have told me to be practical. But Silas just stood there, smelling of rain and earth, and for the first time in months, I felt like the truth was allowed. "Sometimes we're so busy trying to build the garden that we forget to see the forest," he said. "We map out every path, we label every flower, and then we wonder why we feel lost when we step off the stones." There was a depth in his voice that resonated in the hollow parts of my chest. He wasn't talking about landscaping. He was talking about the architecture of a soul. "I feel like I'm supposed to be somewhere else," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "but I don't know where else is. I'm terrified that if I stop moving, I'll realize I've been walking in the wrong direction the whole time." Silas crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "You know, Alara," he said softly, using my name with a weight that made it feel new. "Sometimes it's not about finding the right path. It's about having the courage to walk the one you're on until it leads you to a clearing." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Those words felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't been able to find. Silas gave me one final knowing look, then picked up his tools and disappeared into the shadows of the tool shed. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, the moonlight carving silver paths across my ceiling, and listened to the crickets. Silas's voice echoed in my mind, the courage to walk the path. I had spent so much energy trying to find a shortcut, trying to find a way out of the expectations and the pressure, that I hadn't realized I was already in the middle of my own transformation. The following morning, the world felt different. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a wall. It was a horizon. I found myself watching for Silas. I'd look out the kitchen window while I drank my coffee, tracking the slow, deliberate movement of his wide-brimmed hat as he moved between the flower beds. There was an unspoken connection between us now, a thin, golden thread that pulled at me whenever I saw him. A few days later, I couldn't stay on the porch any longer. I went into the mudroom, found an old pair of my mother's gardening gloves, and walked out into the heat. Silas was near the old oak tree at the back of the property, where the formal garden bled into the wilder woods. He was clearing out a patch of invasive ivy that was trying to strangle the hydrangeas. He didn't say a word as I knelt down beside him. He didn't ask what I was doing or tell me I was going to ruin my clothes. He simply handed me a small trowel and pointed to a cluster of vines near the base of a bush. "Get beneath the roots," he instructed. "If you just pull the leaves, they'll be back by Tuesday. You have to find where it starts." We worked in silence for nearly an hour. The sun beat down on my neck and the dirt caked under my fingernails, but for the first time since I'd come home, the noise in my head went quiet. There was something incredibly grounding about the physical labor, the resistance of the earth, the smell of crushed stems, the sweat stinging my eyes. It was real. It didn't require an essay or a grade. Finally, Silas stopped to take a drink from a rusted thermos. He wiped his mouth and looked at me, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You've got the knack for it," he said. "Most people are too afraid to actually get their hands into the muck. They want the flowers, but they don't want the dirt." I wiped the smudge of soil off my forehead with the back of my glove. "The dirt is the best part," I realized aloud. "It doesn't ask you to be anything other than what you are." Silas sat back on his heels, looking out toward the house. "Your father wants you to be a lawyer, doesn't he? Or a banker? One of those men who spends his life in a room with no windows." "He wants me to be secure," I said, though it sounded like a hollow defense. "He thinks the world is a dangerous place if you don't have a title and a high-yield savings account." "The world is dangerous anyway," Silas countered. "But the most dangerous thing of all is living a life that belongs to someone else. I've seen it happen. People spend 40 years building a house they don't want to live in, and by the time they realize it, the foundations are too deep to move. Is that what happened to you?" I asked the question slipping out before I could censor it. Silas was silent for a long time. He looked down at his hands, turning them over as if he were reading a map. "I had a choice once," he said, his voice distant. "I could have gone to the city. I had an uncle who owned a print shop. He wanted me to take it over. It was a good life, respectable, but every time I went into that shop, I felt like I was being buried alive. I needed the sky. I needed to see things grow. So you chose this?" I asked, gesturing to the garden. "I chose to be the master of my own peace," he replied. "It wasn't easy. My family didn't understand. They thought I was throwing away my potential. But when I'm out here, when the sun comes up and the world is quiet, I know where I'm supposed to be. And that's a wealthier father will never understand." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the dignity in his labor. He wasn't just a gardener. He was a philosopher of the earth. He had found a way to exist that was entirely his own, far away from the metrics of success that I'd been taught to worship. "Do you ever feel like you missed out on something?" I asked. He met my gaze, and there was a profound sadness in his eyes, but no regret. "I wonder sometimes about the roads I didn't take. We all do. But the truth is, Alara, you can't spend your life looking at the map of the roads you didn't travel. You'll miss the beauty of the one you're on. You have to commit to the dirt under your feet." That afternoon was a turning point. As I walked back to the house, leaving Silas to finish his work, I felt a strange sense of calm. The future was still uncertain, and the expectations of my parents still loomed large, but they felt smaller now. They were just one set of plans. In a world full of infinite possibilities, the rest of the summer followed a new rhythm. I spent my mornings reading and my afternoons in the garden with Silas. We didn't always talk, but the silence between us was no longer empty. It was filled with a shared understanding of the seasons and the slow, patient work of growth. He taught me the names of the birds that nested in the eaves of the house. He showed me how to tell if a storm was coming by the way the leaves turned, their undersides to the wind. He taught me that growth can't be rushed, that a plant will bloom when it's ready, and no amount of pulling or pleading will change that. But as the days grew shorter and the air took on the crisp edge of autumn, a new tension began to rise. The date for my return to university was approaching, and with it, the pressure to commit to a major, to a career path, to a life I wasn't sure I wanted. My father began to bring home brochures for law schools, leaving them on the breakfast table like subtle threats. My mother started talking about internships at prestigious firms in the city. They were so busy planning the after that they didn't notice the now. They didn't see the dirt on my shoes or the new light in my eyes. The evening before I was scheduled to leave, I found Silas by the stone wall at the edge of the property. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, casting long, dramatic shadows across the grass. Silas was standing still, his hands resting on the top of the wall, looking out at the woods. I walked up beside him, the dry grass crunching under my boots. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, soaking in the peace of the garden one last time. "It looks different in the fall," I said finally. "Everything does," Silas replied. "The garden is preparing to sleep. It knows that to come back. Stronger, it has to let go of what it no longer needs." I looked at him, my heart heavy. "I don't want to leave, Silas. I feel like if I go back there, I'll lose everything I've learned here. I'm afraid I'll just become another version of what they want me to be." Silas turned to me, his face etched with a gravity that made my breath catch. "Listen to me, Alara. The garden doesn't disappear just because you aren't standing in it. What you've learned here, the stillness, the patience, the dirt that's inside you now, it doesn't belong to this house, and it doesn't belong to your parents. It belongs to you." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The world is going to try to tell you who you are. It's going to offer you 1,000 different paths and tell you that you're a failure if you don't pick the loudest one. But you have to remember that you are the gardener of your own life. You decide what to plant. You decide what to weed out." I felt the tears finally spill over, hot and silent. "How do I know if I'm strong enough to do that?" Silas reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder before he gently squeezed it. His touch was rough and calloused, but it was the most comforting thing I had ever felt. "You're already doing it," he said. "The fact that you're asking the question is the proof. You'll be okay, Alara. Just remember to keep your hands in the dirt. Don't let them make you forget the earth." We stood there for a long time as the light faded to gray and the first stars appeared. There was so much more I wanted to say, much gratitude I didn't know how to voice, but the words felt too small for the moment. The next morning was a blur of packing and polite goodbyes. My father loaded my bags into the car, lecturing me on the importance of networking. My mother hugged me, smelling of expensive perfume and reminding me to call the recruiter she liked. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back. Silas was near the front gate, trimming the hedges. He didn't wave. He didn't look up. He just continued his work, his steady, rhythmic movement, a final reminder of the peace he had shared with me. Back at university, the noise was deafening. The rush of classes, the social politics, the constant hum of ambition, it all felt like a foreign language. For the first few weeks, I felt like I was drowning. I would sit in my lectures, looking at the stone walls and the fluorescent lights, and feel a desperate longing for the smell of cedar mulch. But then something would happen. I'd be walking across the quad and notice the way the light hit the changing leaves. I'd stop and really look at them, feeling the weight of the air and the ground beneath my feet. I'd take a deep breath, And for a moment, I was back in the clearing with Silas Stott. I stopped reading the law school brochures. I started taking classes that interested me: ecology, philosophy, creative writing. I started spending my weekends volunteering at a local community garden, getting my hands back into the muck dot. My father was furious when I told him I wasn't applying for the high-end internships. He told me I was wasting my potential, that I was being irresponsible. My mother sighed and said she didn't understand what had happened to me. I'm just learning to be the gardener, I told them, knowing they wouldn't understand. It's been 10 years since that summer. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a banker. I run a small landscape design firm that focuses on sustainable native gardens. I spend my days outside, under the sky, helping people find their own clearings. It's a quiet life, a simple life, but it is entirely mine. I went back to the old house a few years ago. My parents had sold it and moved to a condo in the city, but I wanted to see the garden one last time. It had changed. The new owners had hired a big commercial crew to maintain it. The wildness at the edges was gone, replaced by perfectly manicured lawn and ornamental shrubs that looked like they were made of plastic. It was beautiful in a sterile, hollow way. I asked the foreman if he knew what had happened to the old gardener, the one who had been there for decades. He shook his head. Old guy? Nah. When the house was sold, he just packed up and left. Someone said he moved back to the coast, bought a little patch of land of his own. Why do you ask? I looked at the stone wall, remembering the orange glow of the sunset and the rough feel of Silas's hand on my shoulder. He taught me how to walk the path, I said. The foreman gave me a strange look and went back to his leaf blower. I walked away, feeling a deep, abiding sense of peace. Silas was gone, but the garden he had planted inside me was in full bloom. I realized then that Silas hadn't just been a gardener. He was a sentinel. He had stood at the gates of my life and made sure I didn't leave without the tools I needed to survive. He had given me the greatest gift anyone can give another person, the permission to be ourselves. The world is still loud. It still tries to tell me who to be and where to go. But every morning, before I start my work, I go out into my own garden. I kneel in the dirt, I feel the sun on my neck, and I listen to the silence. And in that stillness, I hear his voice. It's not about finding the right path, Alara. It's about having the courage to walk it. I take a deep breath, pick up my trowel, and begin the work. I am exactly where I need to be. The air in my own small garden and the foothills of the mountains feels different from the humid, heavy summers of my youth. Here, the wind is crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and the distant, cold promise of snow. But the feeling of the soil is the same. It's the constant. No matter where you are on this earth, the dirt is the great equalizer. It accepts your sweat, your tears, and your labor without judgment. I often think about the unspoken tension I felt with Silas that summer. At 20, I thought it was a mystery to be solved. At 30, I realized it was simply the resonance of two people who recognized the same hunger in each other, a hunger for authenticity in a world built on facades. Silas saw the cracks in my perfect daughter armor before I even knew they were there. He didn't try to patch them. He reached into the cracks and showed me the garden that was waiting to grow through them. My landscape firm, the clearing, isn't about making things look pretty. It's about restoration. We work with families who feel overwhelmed by their own lives, helping them create spaces where they can actually breathe. I always tell them the same thing. Don't fight the land. Listen to it. It knows what it needs to be. There was a client last week, a young woman who reminded me so much of my younger self. It was startling. She was a high-powered executive, her eyes tight with a stress that seemed to live in her bones. She wanted a low-maintenance, perfect garden. She wanted everything to be controlled, orderly, and unchanging. We were standing in the middle of her backyard, which was currently a chaotic mess of weeds and overgrown brambles. She was looking at it with a disgust that I knew was actually directed inward. "I just want it to be done," she said, her voice sharp. "I want to look out my window and see something that makes sense." I knelt down and pulled a handful of damp earth from the ground. I held it out to her. She flinched at first, then slowly reached out and took it. "You can't force sense into a garden," I told her, echoing words I hadn't realized I'd memorized. "You have to work with it. You have to get your hands dirty and find out what's actually underneath all this noise. A garden isn't a destination, it's a conversation." She looked at the dirt in her palm, her face softening for the first time. I saw the wall start to crumble. I saw the clearing begin to form. That's what Silas did for me. He didn't give me a map. He gave me a shovel. He didn't give me the answers. He gave me the soil dot. I wonder where he is now. I imagine him on a small plot of land near the ocean, the sound of the waves replacing the drone of the lawnmowers. I imagine him sitting on his own porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, knowing that he spent his life tending to the things that matter. I hope he knows that one of the seeds he planted grew into something strong enough to withstand the storm's dot sometimes. When the work is hard and the business side of things gets overwhelming, I find myself feeling that old restlessness again. I start to worry about the future, about the what ifs, about whether I'm doing enough, but then I step outside. I find a patch of ground that needs attention. I pull a few weeds, I prune a few branches, and I feel the earth beneath my feet. The quiet returns. The clarity follows. I'm no longer afraid of the unknown. I've learned to be comfortable with the silence between the words. I've learned that the most beautiful things in life are often the ones we don't plan for, the wild sunflowers that pop up in the middle of the yard, the conversation with a stranger that changes your trajectory, the moment of peace that arrives when you finally stop running. I'm walking the path. Some days it's steep, some days it's muddy, and some days it's covered in thorns, but it's my path. And I have the courage to walk it as the sun sets over my own garden tonight. I feel a profound sense of gratitude. I think about the listeners out there in all your different cities and gardens, carrying your own burdens and searching for your own clearings. I hope you find your Silas. I hope you find the person who reminds you that you are allowed to be exactly who you are, without apology. But more than that, I hope you'll learn to be your own Silas. I hope you'll learn to listen to your own soul, to tend to your own growth, and to trust that you already have everything you need to bloom. The garden is quiet now. The shadows are long and the air is cool. I stand up, brush the dirt from my knees, and walk toward the house. My heart is light. My hands are dirty. And for once, for the first time in a very long time, I am whole. The chapter I thought was closing that summer wasn't an ending at all. It was an opening. It was the moment I stopped being a spectator in my own life and became the primary participant. And every day since then has been a continuation of that one conversation on the porch. I step inside, the door closing with a soft, familiar click. I look at the house I've built not with stone and mortar, but with intention and love. It's not perfect. It's a bit messy. There are always boots by the door and sketches of gardens on the table, but it's real. It belongs to me. I think back to that final evening with Silas, the way he told me he'd always be in the garden. He was right. He is in every garden I design. He is in every plant I tend. He is in every moment of stillness I find in a busy world. And as I look out the window at the first stars of the evening, I whisper a quiet thank you to the man who showed me that the earth is the only place where you can truly find yourself. The garden is waiting. The path is clear. And I am exactly where I need to be I recall a specific afternoon about 3 years after I'd started the clearing. It was a particularly difficult time. A major project had fallen through, and for the first time, the financial stability of my small company was in jeopardy. The old gusts of my father's lectures began to haunt me. I could hear his voice in the back of my mind. I told you this was irresponsible. I told you that you needed a real career. I was sitting on the floor of my studio, surrounded by blueprints and soil samples, feeling that familiar, crushing weight of failure. I felt like that 20-year-old girl again, lost, small, and terrified that I had walked in the wrong direction. I decided to take a drive. I didn't have a destination in mind, but my hands seemed to know where to go. I found myself driving toward the coast, toward the small towns where the salt air replaces the smell of the pines. I drove for hours, watching the landscape shift and change until I found a tiny, overgrown nursery at the end of a winding dirt road dot. It was a beautiful, chaotic place. There were no neat rows or professional signs, just thousands of plants in various stages of growth, tucked into every corner of a sprawling, weathered property. In the center of it all was a small cedar shingle cottage with a porch that looked out over the sea dot. An old man was standing near a bed of sea lavender, his back to the road. He was moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm that made my heart stop. I knew that posture. I knew the way he tilted his head to listen to the wind. I parked the car and walked toward him, my breath catching in my throat. As I got closer, he turned dot. It was Silas. He looked older, his hair a shock of white beneath his hat, but his eyes were as sharp and flinty as ever. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just nodded as if he'd been expecting me to drop by for tea. "You look like you've been fighting the wind, Alara," he said, his voice as rough and warm as I remembered. "I have," I admitted, the words coming out as a sob. He led me to the porch and sat me down in a creaky wicker chair. He went inside and came back with 2 mugs of steaming herbal tea. We sat in silence for a long while, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "I almost gave up today," I told him. I almost called my father and told him he was right. Silas took a slow sip of his tea. "And would he have been?" "No," I said firmly. "But it would have been easier." "Being the gardener is hard, Silas. Sometimes the weather doesn't cooperate. Sometimes things die despite your best efforts." "That's not failure," Silas said, looking out at the ocean. "That's just the cycle. A garden that never faces a storm is a garden that never learns to deep root. You're just in a season of pruning, Ilara. It feels like you're losing things, but you're actually just making room for what's coming next." He looked at me, and I saw the same unwavering belief in his eyes that had saved me years ago. "You've built something real. I've seen the photos in the journals. You're doing the work. Don't let a little frost make you forget the spring." We talked for hours that day, not about the past, but about the present. He told me about his nursery, about the challenges of growing things in salt spray, about the peace he had found in his own small clearing. He showed me a new variety of rose he was developing, one that was bred to withstand the harshest coastal winters. "It's tough," he said, touching a delicate petal, "but it's beautiful because of what it survived." When I left that evening, the weight wasn't gone, but it was manageable. I had a new clarity. I realized that my father's version of success was based on the absence of struggle, while Silas's version was based on the mastery of it. I knew which one I wanted. I went back to my studio, restructured my business, and worked harder than I ever had. The clearing didn't just survive, it thrived. But I never forgot that afternoon on the coast. It was the final lesson Silas had for me, that the path doesn't just lead to a clearing. It is the clearing. The struggle, the growth, the dirt, that is the life. I still send him a letter once a year, usually in the spring. I tell him about the gardens I've designed and the people I've helped. He never writes back, but I don't need him to. I know he's there. I know he's reading them, and I know that as long as there is dirt under my fingernails and a horizon in my eyes, we are part of the same garden dot as I sit here tonight. Narrating this to you, I realize how far that golden thread has stretched. It connects me to Silas. It connects me to the earth, and now it connects me to you. We are all gardeners in our own way, tending to our little patches of the world, trying to make sense of the seasons. Don't be afraid of the dirt. Don't be afraid of the silence. And most of all, don't be afraid to walk your own path, even if you're the only one who can see where it leads. Dad, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this journey. The sun has set, the garden is at rest, and I'm finally, truly at peace. One last thing I want to share with you. A small detail I've carried with me since that day at Silas's coastal nursery. As I was walking back to my car, Silas called out to me one last time. I turned, and he was holding a small, weathered stone in his hand. He walked over and pressed it into my palm. It's from the old stone wall, he said. The one at the edge of the woods back at the estate. I took a few when I left. Thought they might be useful as anchors. I still have that stone. It sits on my desk in the studio, a piece of the foundation that I thought was shifting, but was actually the very thing that held me up. It's a reminder that even when we leave a place, we take the strength of it with us. We are built of the soil we've walked on, the people we've loved, and the lessons we've learned in the quiet moments. The garden isn't just a place, it's a state of being. And I'm so glad I found my way into it. Good night, dear friends. May your paths be clear, your hands be busy, and your hearts be full. The world is waiting for you to bloom. As the moonlight spills across the floor of my studio, I think about the many voices that shape us. Some are loud, demanding, and filled with the expectations of the world. They tell us to hurry, to compete, to achieve. But then there are the quiet voices, the ones like Silas's. They don't demand. They invite. They don't criticize. They observe. They are the voices that remind us of the ancient rhythms of the earth, the ones that existed long before law schools and banking firms. I've learned that the secret to a meaningful life isn't in silencing the loud voices, but in learning to prioritize the quiet ones. It's in finding the frequency of the soil and the wind. It's in understanding that you are not a machine meant for constant production, but a living thing meant for seasonal growth. There are days when I still feel the urge to rush, to prove myself, to seek validation from people who don't understand the dirt. But then I touch the stone on my desk. I feel its weight, its coolness, its permanence. I take a breath and I remember the smell of freshly cut grass. I remember the silhouette of a man kneeling in the dirt. I remember the feeling of a world stopping for a moment to let me catch up with myself. And in that remembering, I am restored. The story of the gardener and the girl isn't a story of a teacher and a student. It's a story of two souls who found a common language in a world that had forgotten how to speak it. It's a story of the courage to be still, the bravery to be honest, and the wisdom to know that the most important work we ever do is the work of becoming who we were always meant to be. I hope you find your quiet voice tonight. I hope you find your anchor. And I hope you find the courage to walk your path, one step, one breath, and one handful of earth at a time. The garden is at rest. The world is still. And I am home. In the final reckoning, we aren't remembered for the titles we held or the money we made. We are remembered for the way we tended to the world around us. We are remembered for the seeds we planted and the clearings we created. Silas planted a seed of truth in me, and I have spent my life making sure it grew. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you. Thank you for listening to the quiet parts of this story. Thank you for honoring the memory of a man who never sought the spotlight, but who shone a light for me when I was in the dark. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your gardens. And never forget that the earth is always under your feet, ready to catch you, ready to support you, and ready to help you grow. Good night, everyone. The stars are bright, the path is wide, and the clearing is waiting for you, Dot, as I conclude this narrative. I find myself thinking of a final image. It's from a few months ago. I was working on a large-scale project for a public park, and a group of school children came by to watch us plant a grove of oak trees. One little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, was staring at me with wide, curious eyes. I was covered in mud, my hair was a mess, and I was kneeling in a deep trench, guiding a root ball into the ground. "Does it hurt the tree?" he asked softly. Looked at him and smiled, feeling that old, familiar warmth in my chest. "No," I said, "it doesn't hurt. It's just finding its home. It needs the dirt to be strong." He reached out and touched the bark of the young tree. "I want to help," he. "Say ID." I handed him a small trowel. "Then help. Get beneath the roots. Find out where it starts." As he knelt down beside me, his small hands eager and determined, I felt a profound sense of continuity. The thread was still being woven, the garden was still growing, and the wisdom of Silas was being passed on to a new generation, one handful of earth at a time. This is the beauty of the path. It doesn't end with us. It carries on in the lives we touch and the things we leave behind. It carries on in the stories we tell and the silence we share. I am a Laura. I am a gardener. And I am walking the path, one final deep breath of the night air, and I am ready to rest. The work is good. The life is mine, and the garden is beautiful, Dot. Thank you for being here. Good night.